And well, to discuss more, we'll be joined by Joshua Wycliffe, who is the Chief of Operations at International Solar Alliance. He's joining us live from Baku in Azerbaijan.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. You are in Baku, and we just heard the leaders, they talk about their goals. What is the mood on ground? What are the delegates saying? What are the NGOs gathering from these leaders?
So from what I have observed, I see quite a bit of sense of optimism in the people that come to the International Solar Alliance's hub, and when I've just walked around other hubs and pavilions that we have here. I kind of sense a mood of optimism and expectation. Well, expectation's good as long as it remains as expectations. It doesn't help. It has to be put into action. So at every possible venue, at every possible event, the International Solar Alliance is hammering it to say that, well, expectations need to turn into action and actionable items. So we are able to measure the actions and the outcomes of that. So generally, the last 2 days, there's been a sense of optimism among the NGOs, including the private sector and the other people whom I have interacted with.
Right. And you've served as the permanent secretary of Fiji's Ministry of Environment, and you know how funding works for climate actions. And it's really interesting that some nations here, they want to ask private companies for funding who really they can't control. How realistic are these goals?
Well, look, if you look at it positively, yes, because I mean, I'm speaking out of my experience, both in New Zealand and in Fiji and in Australia. So some of these least developed countries and small island development states are at the brink. They are so up to here on their sovereign debts. So it's impossible to, or near impossible to expect these governments to further invest into climate mitigating technologies and climate mitigating infrastructure. It's the private sector that can step in. However, organizations like the International Solar Alliance work with the governments to be able to look into the existing policies, the legislation, and also the frameworks on regulations to be able to tweak or change in such a way that private sector is able to, they facilitate private sector to investing into these projects. That's the way forward. You know, this money is not endless. There's no bottomless pit, but money is there with the private sector, which can bring in. And it's important that the governments work together in coalition to be able to make the legislation and policies friendly for investment, private sector to enter into the space.
Right. Now,
that's basically how I'm looking at it.
Absolutely. Of course, we can always look for a positive outcome of these meetings. Now, UN climate chief, he mentioned that one man who isn't there, but is overshadowing the crucial talks. Of course, I'm sure it's referring to Donald Trump. What sense are you getting over the next U.S. president's actions? Now, we know that Belarusian president too mentioned there is no presence of these leaders. What do you gather from that?
So the response to this question would be, it would depend on who you ask this question to. I mean, different people hold different kind of opinions and impressions about what's being spoken at. I can speak for my organization and, of course, some of those people that I've spoken to. Generally, the approach could be that we go ahead with, we do not stop or we do not delay the action that we have taken. We continue to work with countries across the globe, countries which believe and which are convinced that there is climate change, and it's got evidence backed up, science-based evidence backing it up. So the actions we do is based on the evidence, and friendly countries, and of course diplomacy plays a major role, as does the economy and commerce. So it will be very important to engage with the naysayers as well, and not leave them alone, but being able to bring everybody on board and do all that we can to build a strong coalition with people who are willing, and at the same time, people who are outside, putting in efforts to being able to bring them on board. Not everything is possible overnight, but I believe, I'm a strong believer in persistence, and I think we could persist in it no matter who overshadows it.
Right. Now, the world's top banks pledged around $120 billion in climate aid for poor nations, but there are nations, which includes India, who have asked for trillions of dollars. Do you think the amount that the world banks have contributed or pledged, is that enough?
I would say no. Actually, the the banks would need to do more in terms of making friendlier terms for green energy. I mean, the transition from fossil fuels to energy, and to put in climate change mitigation programs and infrastructure. The banks would need to be. It's not that they're doing charity. It is profitable. These businesses are profitable, so they need to look at it from an investment point of view, not from an aid point of view. So that would make it a lot more viable business-wise. It makes business sense to both sides. So the money they put in should also have a private sector twist to it, that what is the return on investment. And also one other key thing I'd like to mention is when they look at climate action infrastructure, they would need to ensure that everybody is brought on board and it's a just transition. For instance, if you're talking about energy transition, it's a just transition that no one is left behind. And if you look at it, 90% of the investment into this climate mitigation infrastructure has gone towards countries which already abound with investments. For instance, if you take Africa, 4 to 5% is all that Africa got into energy transition in the last year, 2023. And the reason is that there's a lot of perceived risks of return on investment. So what International Solar Alliance is doing is we've built a solar finance facility, which is on a blended finance mechanism, which takes care of developers' premiums that he has to pay on insurance, handles the first capital loss. So people who come in to invest, the banks who invest, would be assured that, the guarantee is already there. They can boldly come and invest. The developers can invest. So the outcomes of the businesses, it's cut by half. When I say outcomes, I mean the fears and risks are cut into half. So people are able to invest a lot more freer. More and more financial institutions need to look at blended finance mechanisms to overcome these issues that we have. Because why we don't have too much money, or the money that we require, not into this infrastructure businesses, because of perceived risk, and that needs to be handled by financial institutions.
Right. And of course, with that, we always look for a positive outcome of this summit. And of course, you are someone who is going to be able to analyze, since you've worked on developing climatically and economically resilient community solutions. Of course, thank you so much for joining us on the show. That was Joshua Wycliffe, the Chief of Operations at International Solar Alliance, joining us live from Baku.